was before. I guess when it cut out and I rejoined because it was still processing, maybe it stopped. But that demonstration that I just did, there is a video for it in the modules section. I'll go back and show you again, okay? So if you go to the modules section, and then go down to, it is this one here, video for setting up the grid structure for the symbols to present, okay? That's the demo I just did. This is the handout for today's class. And then there's also another video for a demonstration I'm going to do right now, which is for creating a limb. This is for the character design project, or a tail or a tentacle, some kind of like extremity for a character. Okay, this is starting with a simple gestural line and then converting that gestural line into something which is more solid, three-dimensional. And then there's the link to the meeting, which you've obviously found. And then there's a demo for the tracing exercise. So I'm going to do a demo of this as well in the class. And then this is the link to the actual project with the description for the character design project that you can go into. This is also just linking to the assignments, okay, just to clarify where stuff is. All right, so the next thing I wanted to do is, let me go back to the handout. Let's just download that. There's some examples on here that I want to show you. And there's also some links I wanted to point out. So on the handout for today's class, remember that these handouts kind of basically describe what we're doing on the class, at least on this first page. This is what this is all about. So in today's class, we're doing the demonstrations for the exercise sheet number 3. That's that tracing exercise. And then I'm also going to do demonstrations for the character design project. Starting with silhouettes and then starting with a gestural line. And then these links, there's some character design references. So I'm not going to show you these, you can click on these yourself, but there's basically some examples of character design. There's also an article which I would recommend you look at, which is what is character design and how character designers create them. This kind of gives you some hints as to how to approach doing character design. Some of that I will talk about as we do demonstrations, but it's still a useful article to kind of put everything into one sort of list of things that you should be thinking about. And then there's a description again for the second project. And then I start talking about the character design process, and there's some examples to look at. So first of all, the first thing I wanted to talk about in this week's class is the use of silhouette. In character design, oftentimes character designers refer to this idea of silhouette. So a character should have a recognizable silhouette. If you look at all of these characters, which are well-known cartoon characters, I think that most of you will be able to recognize a significant number of them and be able to name them, which is quite remarkable when you think about it, because all we're looking at is the silhouette of it. So when you're designing a character, what you want to create is something which is a unique silhouette. It's a unique set of shapes which only belong to that particular character. But also, going along with that, is that you can use this idea of silhouette as actually a starting point for the design for the character. So you begin with the silhouette, and then you build out the details within it afterwards. So we'll look at that in today's class. Here's some examples of character designers starting with silhouettes. Here's one where it's just using a brush, very loose, quick ideas for the shape of a character. Here's some of the other examples of silhouettes. These ones are done with marker. You can see how a character designer is sort of building out the idea of what that character could be just as a silhouetted shape by scribbling out shapes. Here's some examples. I don't know if you guys saw the movie Coraline, which is a really good piece of stop motion animation. Uses 3D printing as a process. And these are the silhouettes of the characters from that particular movie. And you can see that they have really distinct, interesting shapes. The other thing you should note about them is that there's similarity. Even though they're all distinctly different, there is a relationship between those characters. They feel like they belong together as a set. And then here's a description. I've stolen this from a website. I didn't draw this, but I like the way that it talks about silhouettes. So it talks about you creating silhouetted thumbnails and using those thumbnails to build out more complex illustrations. And then down here, it has a little exercise you might want to try, where you just start off by making a random shape and then convert it into something by adding detail to it. I used to do this a lot, where I would start with a blobby shape and then make that thing three-dimensional as a way to kind of think about forming things three-dimensionally. It's a really good exercise, really good way of like thinking about how do I modulate form, you know? Build out something that's just a flat shape, whatever the shape might be, just scribble a shape, and then start building out three-dimensional forms from that thing by just drawing into it. Some other examples of character designer sketches for characters. Here's a sheet from the movie Moana, Madagascar. And then that's the end of those examples. So that's just to give you some idea. And as I said, a lot of these, there's some really great like examples. For instance, if you go to the Behance, this is a search on Behance for character design, and you get all sorts of really good examples that you can look through that just sort of goes on forever here. This is a really great resource for looking at ideas or examples. I don't want you to copy stuff, obviously. You want to be a creative individual that creates something new and unique. But we're always standing on the shoulders of others, and we're also borrowing. So like look at other people's work and see what they're doing, and look for ideas of style, or look for ideas of approach or color or texture, things like that, you know? All right, I'm going to start a couple of demonstrations in Illustrator now. This first one looks at the idea of starting something for a limb. So it could be an arm, it could be a leg, it could be a tentacle, it could be a tail, any sort of extremity that comes off of a body. You could even use it actually for a body, depending on the type of body it is. But the idea sort of goes back to traditional drawing techniques. If you've ever done life drawing classes, you may have come across what are called gestural drawings. Gestural drawings usually take place where at the beginning of a life drawing class, the life drawing instructor will do these warm-up poses, which last for about 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes. And the model will stand stand in a particular pose, but for a very short amount of time. So basically what you're doing is drawing down what the gesture of the figure is. Here's where the spine is. Here's where the hips are. Here's where the shoulders are. That's where the arms go, and so on. So here what I'm doing is I'm beginning with a gestural line for where the leg goes. So here you can see the opposite side of the leg, of this other leg. And I'm beginning by using the pen tool. You could use some other tool, but I'm using the pen tool to create the shape because the pen tool gives me the most amount of control. So I click and drag. At this point, I've got two handles, the trailing handle, as I call it. I no longer need because I want to go off in a totally different direction. So I'm going to click back on there to remove that trailing handle. And then I can go off in a totally different direction. This is one of the only differences. In fact, I think it's the only difference between Illustrator and Photoshop when it comes to using the pen tool. In Photoshop, when you want to remove the trailing handle, you have to option click or alt click if you're on a PC on the anchor point to remove that trailing handle. Whereas in Illustrator, you just click on it. So just to recap that one more time, you click and drag, click to remove the trailing handle, click and drag, click, and then click and drag. So the click and drag is only because I want them to be curved. If they wanted to be straight, I could just click, right? Okay, now we've got this basic form. Chris?
Sorry, Professor. So, when you want to get rid of the handle, you're not pressing Shift Control. You just click on the anchor point.
Yeah, you simply click back on it. So like when you're drawing with the pen tool, I'll give you another example.
Okay.
Let's say you wanted to draw a wave, for instance.
Okay.
You could start off here, click and drag, go up to the top of the wave, click and drag. And then when I get to this point, if I was to go in here, I'm creating a curve that I don't want. But if I click back here, it removes that trailing handle. Now I can go in a totally different direction.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So going back to this one, now I have this line. If I wanted to make it into a leg, I can start off by adding some thickness, because obviously it's a little thin for a leg. So I'll add a bit of thickness to it. If you wanted to, you could also go into the stroke panel, and in the stroke panel, we could round the cap. So that means that the end of that path has now got the stroke rounding around the corner rather than the default, which is this butt cap where it stops right at the end. There isn't another cap here, which is the projecting cap, but I don't really ever see much purpose of that. But here I've got the rounded cap. And then underneath that, you also could round the corners if you wanted to. This is kind of subtle, but this is now rounding this corner and this corner actually. So in this particular case, we don't see it very clearly, but if I click on it again, you can maybe just about see that that's rounding slightly. And then the other thing that we can do is we can modulate the path along its length by using the width tool. If we choose the width tool, so maybe on here, for instance, I want the calf muscle to come out from behind. So if I hold Option, remember when you hold Option with the width tool, you can go from one side. Normally this goes both sides of the path, but holding Option, I can just pull it out on this one side. And then if I hold Option a bit further down and pull this back in, we've now made that feel a little bit more like it's got some muscle tone. We could then pull it down here on the thigh and pull it back in again here. So we get something that's more like a leg shape. Maybe on the foot down here, I bring it in a little bit, you know, but I'll leave that bit actually. At a certain point, I can't do much more with the width tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Object, Expand Appearance. So this is now a filled object. It's no longer a stroke at all. We look at it in outline mode now, it looks like this. So prior to expanding it, it looks like this. It's just a path, right? Then when you expand it, it ends up looking like this because it's now a filled object. When you expand objects, it quite oftentimes ends up with a lot of anchor points, more anchor points than are really necessary. And the amount of anchor points makes it difficult for you to modulate the shape further. It makes it harder for you to edit it. So let's go in here and go to Object, Path, Simplify, and simplify that path a little bit. You can adjust this to make it even more simple or less simple. But I want to have as few points as possible, kind of like if I'm working with the pen tool. And then once I'm happy with that, I'll just click away. You'll also notice that now I've expanded it, there's kind of this weird overlap here and here. I can remove that by using the Pathfinder Unite and just clicking on that to unite that whole shape together. Now there's various ways that I can modulate this form further. I could use the direct selection tool and move anchor points or handles. I could take anchor points out. So if I'm on the pen tool, I can put my cursor over an anchor point to remove a point. I could also add a point by putting my cursor onto the path. So when a path is selected, if it's over the path, it becomes the Add Anchor Points tool. And if it's over an anchor point, it becomes the Minus Anchor Points tool. So generally speaking, I don't ever really have to use these tools because I can just stay on the pen tool and switch between them. Then I can hold the Command key or Control key on a PC, and then I can move that point to change the shape of the leg a little bit further. And I'll bring that handle up also to continue that curve better.
Professor?
Yeah, Abby.
How do you say that you switch between the minus and the plus anchor tool? I didn't hear that part.
So when you're on the pen tool, if you have an object which is selected, when you all you do is you put your cursor over an anchor point, and then it becomes the minus anchor point tool automatically. And then when you put your cursor over a path, it would become the Add Anchor Points tool automatically. But if you're off of a path, it'll just start a new path.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I understand that now. Thank you.
Now here at the bottom, I could use the direct selection tool to pull this anchor point in to make that more squashed at the bottom of the foot. Maybe bring this ankle out a little bit. So I'm just going around, I'm holding command, I'm still on the pen tool. So if I want to move a point out, I can get rid of it by clicking on it. Or if I want to add a point, I can add a point. But when I switch to the command key, I can use the direct selection tool. Again, without switching from the pen tool. You'll see that in my tool panel, I'm still on the pen tool. But I can then use the direct selection tool to manipulate the shape further. Okay, now I've got to this point and I'm pretty happy with it. What I can do is I can change it now so that it has a stroke going around the outside of that because it's a filled object. So now I've got that, I'm going to add a little bit of thickness to that stroke. If I was to expand this, so let me add some color to it. If I was to go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke, or you could just choose Expand, press OK. Now, this looks a little bit confusing because there's these three lines, but basically the ones on the outside, like this one and this one, if I double click, I can select them both. This is what was the stroke going around the outside. This other part in the middle, so if I select this and we look at it in outline mode, you can see that's the middle part of it. That's the color. So if I move that, that's the color inside of it now. Those are separated from each other. So if I wanted to, I can go in here now and I can use the direct selection tool. And at the corner where the thigh overlaps, I can create a little bit of an overlap. That slight overlap will help to feel like it has some dimension, like the thigh is actually coming over, the muscles coming over the top of the calf muscle here. And then you could do the same thing at the bottom as well, you know, like right here. You could maybe add a point if you need to. And I'm going to add a couple of points. I'll add one here, I'll add one here. And then I can take this point and bring it in and create a little bit of an overlap there. Or maybe a little bit of an overlap here and so on. I'll leave it like that, I think. It does make it, once you expand this path, it makes it a little bit more difficult for you to edit it. So like here, for instance, if I change the shape of that, it's also pulling away from here. So I'd have to take this point out as well. And then I'd have to manipulate this shape so that it feels like that path is in the right place again. And I'd also have to move this. They're not connected to each other. So you want to make sure that when you expand the path, that it's at a point where you're happy with the overall shape so that you can manipulate it like that. And then the other thing that you could do is to add some shading to it. So the shading will allow to give it more of a sense of three-dimensional form. Let's say I wanted some shadow along this side. You'd first of all define where your light's coming from. So let's say your light's coming from this direction. My shadow would run along this side of the leg and down here and underneath the foot and probably underneath the knee a little bit as well. So I could draw a shape that goes something like this. And if he had shorts on or a skirt on or something like that, you could have a shape which goes over at the top first. So that's casting a shadow from the clothing. This could go under here. Past that, I'm going to come back over here now. Down here. Along here. Along the bottom of the foot. And then back out. So I'm going to go all the way back round the other side. And I'll make this transparent so you can see what's happening a little bit better. So that's where I'm positioning the shadow. Everything that's on the outside we can get rid of with the shape builder tool. So to make it more like a shadow, I'm going to choose this original color and change the blending mode to multiply. And then if I select this shape, so the color shape, the original color shape, so this shape here, and this shape, then choose the shape builder tool and option click on the outside, I can get rid of all of that. And then we're just left with that. And you could add a highlight in there as well if you wanted to, but I'll leave that for right now. Once you've made one leg, by the way, you could use the rotate tool, click right here, hold option, drag it out, and then you go another one. Maybe not with the arrow, but you could drag this. By clicking on where his hip is, you could drag it from that position and then pull it out like that to make it look like someone's running. So that's one approach. I'm not saying it's the only approach to creating a limb. It's just a suggestion. Okay, it's just a way of doing it, a way of thinking about it. And then you can do the same thing with an arm. So I'm not going to go through that. The process would pretty much be the same. You could then manipulate the shape, you know, by adding in the with the width tool. You could go in and hold option and adjust particular points. So you can make the wrist a little bit narrower and that part of the arm a little bit wider and so on. And then you can expand it. And then you can use Pathfinder to unite it, so you get rid of the overlaps. Change it to black and white. On this end, I'd probably get rid of the stroke altogether. So I'd click here. And you've got a lot of points. So let's simplify it. Object, Path, Simplify. This makes it easier to edit it, remember? Let's make it a bit simpler. It's not selected properly. Let's select it. Object, Path, Simplify. That's better. And then this part right here, I could just get rid of. I don't need any of this. So I can just delete these. And then that would connect to the body, you know. So if you had a body as a separate shape behind this, it could connect to it like that, you know.
Professor, what key do you use for with the width tool?
To send it to back, Christopher?
No, when you're using the width tool, do we have to use control option or
I'm not quite hearing you, Christopher. What did you say? You said when I'm using what?
the width tool?
Oh, the width tool. Oh, to make it go from one side?
Right, correct.
Oh, yeah, you hold option. Sorry. Yeah, if you wanted to. So normally when you pull this, it pulls it from both sides. But if you want to pull it from one side, you hold option. And it's only pulling it from that one side.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So on this one, this is just another example of how you could use it for things like tails or tentacles or something like that. I had done a series of illustrations recently for character designs for Microsoft for this thing that they do called the hackathon. I've done it actually for the last 3 or 4 years. And in that, I did a series of different characters. So over the years, we've designed different characters. This year's event was obviously canceled. It's a 40,000 people event in Vegas. And so that obviously had to be canceled. I think they did do it online, but my participation got cut off pretty short. So I had started doing some new characters. One of the characters we did was a kraken, which is like a kind of like a octopus type thing. You know, it's got tentacles. And so that was part of this is how I created the octopuses or the kraken is by using that technique. And also with some of the other characters, like as a way to create the limbs, for instance. So it tends to work best with things which are sort of organic. If it was more like a character, say a robot, I probably wouldn't use this technique in the same way because it's a more mechanical thing. It tends to work better with more organic types of things, but something which is an extremity to a body, or even possibly the body, you know, you could draw the shape of a body, you know, like where the spine is, for instance, and then you could thicken that up and use that as the basis for the body also, you know, round off the ends maybe, and then expand that shape. And then that could become a body, you know, in a given situation. Like I said, it's not necessarily the way to do it, it's just an approach, all right? The other approach that I wanted to talk about was this idea of using silhouettes. So this is created out of silhouettes, basically just boxes and circles. and then it's been manipulated afterwards. So one of the suggestions on the handout for today's class, right at the very end of the handout, there was a really nicely illustrated description of the use of silhouettes. And there's a suggestion at the end of that, which talks about using just a random shape as a starting point. So I'm going to create a new Illustrator file and sort of show you what I mean. I keep having this set to make 3 artboards. I don't change that. All right, so let's say I just draw a random shape, and it could be a random shape that I make with the rectangle tool and then add some points and modify it. It could be with the pen tool. You can make the shape how you want. I think what I'll do is I'll do it with the pen tool. I'm just going to kind of draw out a random sort of weird shape and then see what it suggests. A lot of artists over the centuries have used this process as a way to create ideas, is to just draw a random shape and then see what that suggests and then build something out of it. So I can sort of see a figure coming out of there. It sort of looks to me a little bit like a hunchback with a walking stick right here and is wearing a cape, or she's wearing a cape. I'm going to adjust it a little bit here, so this might make it a little clearer. If I was to do this and then add a couple of points down here and pull this up, add another point here, pull this up here. That's pulling up a little bit too much because I want this to be like a big roby kind of thing, so we'll take that down. And then if I modify the arm in a little bit, and then we'll add another point here and pull this in. I kind of find it's quite easy sometimes for me to work just with straight lines to begin with, because that way I don't have to think about all the problems with curves. And then I can add the curves in afterwards. So I'll add another point here, move this up. I'll add another point here and another point here and move this back out so it starts to look more like a walking stick. And then if you want to start adding curves, the way you can do this, again, I'm doing all of this, by the way, on the pen tool. If I put my cursor over here and hold Option, holding Option on the pen tool gives you the Convert Anchor Point tool, so we can then curve this out. We can hold Option and curve this one in. We can hold Option and curve this one out. Curve this one in. Oh, actually, this one out. I'll get rid of that point altogether and just make one long curve, actually. And then I'm going to round this one off. So if I hold Command, I can get the Direct Selection tool, and then I can just curve that like this on the corner. You see how that starts to develop? So I want this to be a little bit longer now at the bottom, so I can pull this down. At this point, it's all just a silhouette. And that's what we're focusing on. We're focusing on just the silhouette. We want to be able to recognize what this character is by just seeing it as a black shape. And I can keep adjusting this and modifying this until I'm happy with it. So I can pull this in a little bit. At the bottom here, I'm going to hold Option again. I'm not on the pencil. As I hold Option, you see how it's creating this curve, and the handles are at those angles, right? If I hold Shift, you'll notice that it changes that curve into a different direction. It pulls the handles straight down. I actually want them to be at the same angle as the stick, so that the curve at the bottom is in perspective to the walking stick. And then I can go up here, and we can hold Option again and curve this out. So we've got the walking stick looking more like a walking stick. And then we'll add a little bit here, where we add a point, add another point, take this one out. This is where the hand connects. So I actually want this to go the other way. And we'll pull this a little bit further. We don't need much of the hand, but a little bit to indicate that it's being held, you know. And then on the bottom here, I want to give it some form. I want to make it feel like it's three-dimensional. So if we add some points in here, I can pull some of these points out. Now it has more of a sense of having some dimension to it, and we can exaggerate that further by adding points in between those, pulling them back in a little bit, creating curves on these shapes. By just selecting them with the Direct Selection tool and then pulling it. once you're happy with the silhouette, so I'm not really happy with this silhouette, but we'll pretend that I am happy with it. We'll suspend disbelief. And we'll go, yeah, I'm happy with that. That's fantastic. So I can't resist doing a little bit more tweaking. But the once I've got to a point where I'm kind of happy with that silhouette, I can then start going in if I wanted to and adding detail to it. So I go inside here, I want to have a little expression of the face. So I'm going to draw a shape in here. And then that negative shape will reveal the face. So that's another. It's just a suggestion of how to approach starting your characters. If you focus initially just on a silhouette, you don't have to worry about any of the detail to begin with. And then you can start building out detail inside of there afterwards. So you know, like here, I might decide we need a couple more wrinkles in this where the sleeve buckles up. The fabric buckles up here where it's going into the sleeve. And then all of that would need to be rounded off a little bit. And you could then add some detail on top of that. Let me move this up a little bit. So if I drew a shape here, we could have a little highlight on the top of the arm there. So I don't think it really needs that actually, but you could add little details like that into it. You might also add some highlights onto the clothing, you know, like over the top here, some light hitting the surface. So you got to define where's the light coming from and then draw those. But that, I think that's an interesting approach to doing the characters, is to sort of build it out in that kind of manner where you're starting off with a raw shape. The other way is think of it in terms of just shapes. So for instance, if you start with basic shapes and you build out like the head as one thing and the body as another thing, it can be really sort of very basic shapes to begin with. You could even do this sort of thing where you're just sort of feeling out like, where would the body go? Go here. Let's say I'm doing that. Let's make it sort of a little bit more interesting. I'll make it into a particular character. So let's say I wanted to make it into like a sort of monstrous character. I could begin with an overall big shape like that. And I want him to arch his back. So I can go to envelope, distort, make with warp. Set this to vertical. Put a bit of a bend on it in both directions. I'm going to scale this a little bit smaller. Expand it. Round the corners. With the head, I could start off with something like this. Remember that now with Illustrator, you have live shapes. So once you've drawn a shape, you can easily rotate it by just putting your cursor outside the corner. So for the head, I might start with a box and then draw another box. And then I can very easily rotate that into position. So it's coming out from there. And then for the leg, I'll draw a box, rotate its position. Maybe round out the corners. So maybe it's better to round it out actually before I revolve it. Or rotate it, I should say. So if I hold Option and drag down. The reason it might be better to do it at this point is because when I drag it down, those handles drag down straight. So they're in alignment with the object. Whereas if it's at an angle, they'll still drag down straight and it'll be out of alignment with the actual object. So I'm holding Shift also, so those handles are going straight up. If I'm not holding Shift, remember, it does that. And then I can rotate this. So with that selected, I'm on the rectangle tool. I could rotate it. So you could build the character out of bits and pieces like that as well. I would suggest starting with simple shapes, one way or another. The other way I'm going to show next week is where we start off with the sketch and then we ink it. Let me see if I have an example of that one. Bear with me for 1 second. What's that? That's weird. Maybe I'll go to. Too many files. Give me 1 sec. Let me see if I can search it. Weird, I can't find it. Okay, I'll try to find that and post it afterwards because I'm going to waste too much time otherwise. All right, let me go back to the handout. So the next thing I wanted to go over is the tracing exercise. This one I do have to find. Bear with me for a second. So for this one, you don't need to do yours quite as detailed as this. Okay, just to be clear. But this is the exercise I'd mentioned at the beginning of class. This is one of those exercise sheets which is worth 3 points. And the idea of it is really a sort of technical exercise which goes over using the pen tool. Also, we talk a little bit about using layers. And then it also gives you, from an artistic point of view, it gives you the challenge of converting something which is a continuous tone image into flat areas of color. So this is the one where I was showing you the Shepard Ferry examples. This is for that exercise number 3. Also in this one, I'll take a look at how we can modify the color through using blending modes and also using the feature recolor artwork, which is at the top here in the color panel, in the control panel, I should say, where you can go in here and you can adjust all of the colors together or individual colors separately, and you can see it change as it happens. So on this one, we're going to go through the process of, first of all, tracing the image, thinking about how we set that up. I'll talk about how to use the pen tool again. So you've probably gone over a similar exercise to this, or you may have gone over a similar exercise to this previously, I'm not sure. Or you may have gone through exercises and using the pen tool. So some of this may be going over old ground for you. But hopefully, I think that this is a really good exercise for students to do to kind of get to grips with a couple of different things. The pen tool specifically, and then also in a more general sense, how to sort of simplify something which is quite complicated. This exercise is really good for that in terms of taking a photographic image and then converting it into flat shapes. So I'm going to begin by copying this, and I'm going to make a new Illustrator file. And the idea of this as well was that when you're doing this, once you've done this exercise, you guys can use this as your Zoom profile picture. So when you're not showing your video, I can see a picture of you. So I'm going to place this. Once I've placed the image into here, I'm going to go to the artboard tool, and I'm going to set up here at the top. I'm going to set it to fit to selected art. So now it's exactly the same size as the image. Then I'm going to go to the layers panel. And in the layers panel, I want to change this layer into a template layer. So if I double click on this, I can choose template and then press OK. You'll notice, first of all, that the image got lighter. It's screened back. If I double click on that again, you can see that under here it says dim images to 50%. You can change that percentage if you want. So if you want to see the image more clearly, you can make it say 60%. But the idea of screening it back is it makes it easier for you to see what you're drawing over the top of it relative to the image. And then the other thing with having it set to a template layer is that you may well draw over, in fact, you're almost certain to draw over stuff that you're going to have to draw again later on. So we need another layer because we don't want to draw on the template layer. Let's say I draw the shape of the face. So here I don't need to draw it accurately because the hair is going to go over the top. But if I draw the ear shape accurately, and then I come around here and draw the face. And I'm actually going to include the neck as part of this same thing because it's all going to be that sort of skin color. So I'm not going to draw this super accurately for right now because I just want to block something in to show you what I mean. But I'll go around to the beginning. And here, it doesn't matter where it goes because the hat's going to draw over the top. So that doesn't have to be accurate at all. And then I'll eyedropper this color. So I went into outline mode so that I could eyedropper the color from the image. Then I can do Command Y again to go back into preview mode to preview what that looks like. Now, the advantage of this is that if this layer wasn't a template layer, if it was just a regular layer, we could obviously screen the image back by selecting it and lower the opacity. That's not really the point. The point is that now in outline mode, I can't see the image. And I've covered up what I need to draw next, which is the eyes and the glasses and stuff like that. So there would be ways around it. But the template layer, the purpose of it is for tracing. And when you're tracing, you'll realize if you try this, that this makes it significantly a lot easier. The fact that we can view it in outline mode is essential to be able to do this effectively. It really makes a big difference. And then the other thing I should point out is that I'm copying and pasting this from another file, but it's more likely when you start this, you're actually going to place the file. So you would go to File, Place, and I need to go on a layer which is open to do that. So File, Place, and then you choose the image that you want to place. And I don't think I have this image on here anywhere, so I can't actually place it. But let's say I place something else for right now, just to show you. I can place this one. Down at the bottom here, you have a couple of check boxes. So one of them is link. For this, I would suggest that you take link off. Generally, in Illustrator, I take link off. If you have link unchecked, it means that you're embedding the image into the Illustrator file. So all the information for that photographic image is now stored within your Illustrator file. If you don't place it as an embedded file, if you check that link box, then it's creating a connection to the original source file on your hard drive. So if you send it to me through Canvas, for instance, I won't have that image. And when I open up the tracing, I won't see your photographic image because it will be missing. So you want to make sure that the link is unchecked, which means that we're embedding the image into the Illustrator file. Is that clear? That's important. The other thing we want to make sure is that when you're placing the image, you place it as a template. So this is making the layer that it places the image onto a template layer. It's also creating a new layer for you to trace over the top of. So your final setup would still be the same as mine, except you're placing it, you're just saving a step, basically. Does that make sense? Okay, so once I've got this set up, this first layer, I'm going to make the background. For your background, if you wanted to, you could just do a straight flat color, because really what I'm interested in seeing is your face. And make sure this is a template layer again. Okay, so I'm just going to block in an area of color for right now. So that's my background color. I just eyedroppered the wall in the photograph. On my finished version, I did actually illustrate the background, and I had a lot of fun doing all of the frames and stuff on here. But you can, as I said, this project is worth 3 points. So if you wanted to minimize it and just stick to doing your face, you're welcome to do that. Okay. Okay, and then I'm going to separate that. So I've locked that layer, the background layer, so I'm not drawing on there. This next layer is going to be for the face. Okay. And then I'm going to make another layer. So I'll lock this one, and I'll call this one shirt. And then I'm going to do Command Y, so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'll draw around here. So as far as using the pen tool goes, you want to use as few points as possible. That doesn't mean you're not going to use many points, because your line might demand a lot of points. But you use as few points as possible. And you determine that by using points wherever there's a change in direction. So you don't need to add a point when there isn't a change in direction. If it's just going straight, there's no need for a point. But here, for instance, I'm going along here, and this is basically straight. So I can just go all the way across here without an additional point. But if there's a slight curve to that, which actually there is, I could click in the middle of it and drag so that I pull out a little bit of a curve there. Then when I get up to this point, I can click and drag again. Then here I can click and drag again. Here I want to go off in a different direction as I go around this part of the collar. So I'm going to click to end that trailing handle, go up to here, click and drag again. Now when I get to this point, I've already got this skin defined, so the edge of the shirt, so I can just go straight across to this other side. There's no reason for me to draw this again, because the shirt is going to go over the top. Actually, sorry, it's going to go underneath the face. Right? We could have done this the other way around. I could have had it so that the face was on, the face was underneath the shirt, and in which case I would draw the shirt shape, and the face could just go behind that. Doesn't matter which way around you do it, but I generally do it based off of what is physically in front. So in this case, in this case, the skin is physically behind the shirt, right? The neck is behind the shirt. So that's why I'm drawing it that way. But it actually doesn't matter in terms of how you do it. It's just easier for me to think of it like that. So then I'm going across here. Here, there's a bit of a curve at a point. When I get down to here, I'm going to click and drag here to create like a little lump around the fold, and then carry on my way. As you're going along, because I'm zoomed in, you're going to run out of space. You know, so let's say I was here and I'm drawing along. I've run out of space now, especially as you guys are at the bottom. Let me move you guys up. Oh, I can't do that with a pencil. But I can't see where to go now because you guys are all in a row at the bottom here. So I can use the space bar. The space bar will give me the hand tool, and then I can move the screen to a different position so I can continue on my way. I don't have to switch to the pen tool then. I don't have to switch to the hand tool, I mean, and then switch back to the pen tool. I can just hold space bar, move it, let go of space bar, and I'm still on the pen tool. Also, if I hold the command key, I can get the direct selection tool, and then I can readjust the path without leaving the pen tool. So I'm still connected to this path. I'm still connected to this point right here. So if I continue, you can see I'm still connected to it. If I switch, like let's say I went here and I go, oh, I need the direct selection tool. First of all, I've got to waste time because I've got to go and choose that tool. Then I adjust it. Then I have to go back to the pen tool. Now I have to reconnect with the path because I left it. So the advantage of using the shortcut of just command or control on a PC so that you can readjust points as you go along is that it saves you a lot of time. It saves you a lot of like switching between tools and so on. Now I've gone all the way across. So I'm going to eyedropper this color for the shirt. And then this shirt right now is on top of the face when really it should be behind it. So to change that, if you look in my layers, I've got the shirt layer above the face layer. I'm going to change in the panel options to make these a little bit bigger so you can see this more clearly. So those are my layers right now. I've got the background layer, then we've got the face layer, then we've got the shirt layer. But the shirt layer really needs to be in between these two layers. So if I click and drag on it, I can drag that down. And you can see that there's a blue line that appears in between those other two layers, which indicates that that's where it's going to go. If this layer below it was unlocked, I could actually drag it inside that other one, and then the entire layer highlights as blue, and we'd create what's called a sublayer. But in this case, I'm going to drag it to this point where it's in between those two layers. And now you can see that the face is defining the edge of the shirt by the shape of that sitting on top. So let's lock these two layers, and then I can draw the hat. So I'm going to make another layer. Call this hat. Then I'm going to draw with the pen tool the shape of the hat. So if I zoom in a little bit here, this point's not quite right. So I'm going to hold Command, move that over a little bit, and then continue on my way. Again, as I'm moving it, you see I'm moving it now, I'm holding the space bar, so it gives me the hand tool temporarily. Here, I need to get rid of this trailing handle, so I click back on the anchor point. Then I can continue to draw. Here I added too many points, so you can take that one out, I don't need that. So one of the reasons to limit the number of anchor points is it makes it easier to edit if there's less anchor points. Another reason to limit the number of anchor points is that the size of an Illustrator file is based to a large extent on the number of anchor points in it. So if you have less anchor points, it'll be a smaller file size. Okay, I'm going to eyedropper that color. So that's my start. From here, I could then start adding detail into it. So I've sort of, what I'm doing initially, if we look at this in outline mode, is I'm sort of defining all the big chunks within the illustration, okay? And then separating each of those big chunks onto different layers. How you organize that, first of all, depends on the image, and it also depends on your own way of thinking. But you're logically separating different chunks of the illustration into different parts. So some people might suggest using more layers. Some people might suggest using less layers. There's an instructor at OCC that teaches the introduction class that teaches students to use a lot of layers. So their illustrations, there might be hundreds of layers for an illustration like this. My feeling about that, and I'm not saying that he's wrong actually, I'm just saying that it's a different kind of philosophy about the way to approach it. My way of thinking about the layers in Illustrator is to think of them as a little bit like a filing cabinet. In Photoshop, layers are essential. They really are essential. It's very difficult to do stuff in Photoshop without working with layers because everything, if it's on the same layer, it all merges together. In Illustrator, every single object occupies its own level within the layer. So you can always move them around and separate them quite easily, unlike the pixel format you have in Photoshop, where everything on that layer is joined together as a set of pixels, right? So in Illustrator, you could actually do pretty much everything on one layer. In the case of tracing, you'd want to at least have a template layer and then another layer, but you could really trace the entire thing on one layer. So the purpose of the layers is purely organizational. It's a way for you to lock up part of the illustration whilst you're working on another part of the illustration. So for instance here, or hide it. So for instance here, I could turn off the background whilst I'm working on it. Or I could lock the background so that I can't accidentally move that by mistake whilst I'm working on another area of it. So that's the main purpose of layers in Illustrator. We have layers, which are what are called top level layers. And then you also have what are called sublayers. So on any given layer, you could go in and add an additional sublayer. You select the layer you want the sublayer to be inside of. And then you can create a sublayer. This needs to be unlocked when I do that. I can create a sublayer inside of them. And if I open this up, I could name that layer. So this one could be called hat detail. So it's a way for you to kind of organize stuff. So if you think of it in terms of a filing system, it's like the entire thing is a filing cabinet, and then you've got a folder. And then inside the folder, you have other things, right? So if you think of it as a filing system, imagine like you have your filing system set up where you have a file folder for your American Express January report, American Express February, American Express. It doesn't really make any sense because you're organizing it. There's too many separations. What you want to do is clump things together into chunks. So all of your credit cards are together, all of your banking is together, all of your schooling is together, and so on, right? So that's what I'm doing is I'm taking the big chunks. My initial thing is I look at the image. What are the big chunks in the illustration? If I was going to do the background, I might separate it. So for instance, all of the paintings are on one layer, or all of the background color is on another layer, and then all of the stairs are on another, something like that. I might break it down further. By the way, I almost never use sublayers. This is just my own personal way of working. So I'm showing you the fact that you can do sublayers. It may be something you don't really need to know, but it's useful to know that it exists. For one reason is that sometimes as a creative professional, you'll be working with other people and they might have layers embedded within layers, and you need to be able to understand how to figure that out, you know? And you might find for your own purposes that it helps you to organize it in that way. So you have one main layer, and then within that layer, you have sublayers for other things. So for instance, on the face, I might have several sublayers. I might have one that's for the eyes. I might have another one which is for the beard. So I personally wouldn't organize it that way, but you might want to organize it where you really break it down into sort of different chunks within the illustration. Personally, I break it down into one big chunk, and then all of the detail goes onto that chunk. And what I do when I'm working on layers where there's lots of stuff on top of each other is I lock stuff by doing Command 2, unlock it by doing Option Command 2, or I hide it by doing Command 3, and bring it back by doing Option Command 3. In that way, I can work in a way which is similar to working with layers without actually working with layers. The other thing you can do in terms of sublayers is that you could create a top level layer. So let's say I had a top level layer which is called facial features. Let me delete these two. And then I might decide later on that instead of having the facial features just above the face, I'll bury it into the face. So I don't have so many layers because I've got too many layers to look at. And now I've got a layer within there where I would do things like the eyes and the nose and the mouth and so on. Okay. One of the reasons I don't like to separate it quite so much is that actually on this type of illustration where I'm tracing it, I try to sort of forget about the fact that I'm drawing an eye, or I'm drawing a pair of glasses, or I'm drawing a nose. And I focus really on where there is a change in tonal value. And I think of it more as abstract shapes. There's a well-known book that's been used in colleges for a long time called Drawing on the Right-Hand Side of the Brain, which if you do drawing classes, you may come across. It's an old book now. It's like from the 60s, I think. But it talks about the way that we understand perception. And there is a series of exercises through that book, which are for people who are learning how to draw. And the idea of the book, the premise of the book is that anybody can learn how to draw if you give them the right techniques. And I think I agree with that philosophy. I think anybody can learn to draw. Some people have this idea that I can't draw, and other people have this idea that I can draw. And a lot of that is really just that they practice it more. So if you're very young and you start drawing young and you're good at it from an early age, people go, oh, you're really good at drawing. And then you do more of it because you like people going, oh, you're good at drawing. And so then you get even better at it, right? It's like anything. If you practice it, you'll get better at it. So one of the things with this exercise is it relates to drawing in a traditional sense, because drawing is really about looking. And I know that that sounds like something that somebody who teaches drawing says, but it is really true. Like when you draw something, if you're doing objective drawing, like life drawing, or in this case, if you're drawing you're drawing from a photograph and you're reproducing that drawing, what you're really doing is you're looking at what's there, you're analyzing what's there very carefully, and then you're thinking of ways that you represent that through marks, right? So in this case, we're representing it through shapes, vector shapes. Now, how do we represent something which has a subtle transition of tone over a surface? Like this tonal value here, how do I represent that with just flat shapes? This is part of this exercise, part of the difficulty. So for instance, on the face, I have areas of shadow. I have areas that are more lit. And so one way of doing this, or the way to do this, is to really break this down into a series of tonal values. I was suggesting when I was showing you this, the Shepherd Ferry ones, he generally does it in 3 tonal values or 4 tonal values, somewhere around about there. So if you broke it down into a shadow, a middle tone, and a highlight, you can then go, well, all of this area. So you have to make an executive decision, right? You have to make, and this is what design is about. This gets to the real essence of design. Design is actually about making decisions. How big is it going to be? What colors are going to be? What typeface am I going to use? Should this have a bit more space around it, or should it have less space around it? Do I need to adjust that image a little bit more or not? It's all decision making. It's planning and decision making. That's what design is about. And so in this, you're making decisions about where does that line go? Because there isn't a line there, really. There is no shape there as such. It all blends together. So you're having to actually look at something objectively, and then you're having to kind of, through human intelligence, you have to create a kind of algorithm to define what that where that tonal value comes. So let's say I go across here and I draw a shape that comes through the face here. And remember, I'm starting outside of the actual face in the hat, because I'm going to draw over the shape of the face. So even though this is not going to be seen, it needs to be drawn so that it will separate with the rest of the illustration when I do the shape builder tool, which is what we're going to do. I can do around here. I don't care whether this is the eye or the glasses or the skin tone. It's getting darker there, so I'm drawing it. In that book, drawing on the right-hand side of the brain, one of the exercises, you take the photographic image and you turn it upside down. So the idea of that is that when you're drawing it, you're not looking at it as it is. You're looking at it as something kind of abstracted because it's upside down. So here, for instance, remember I mentioned when we were looking at the Shepherd Ferry stuff, the way that he uses the shape to fade the tone out? So here, this tonal value where my cheek kind of goes in a little bit because I smoked too much when I was younger, I can go up here and pull this out, and then click back on that anchor point to make a point, because I'm going to go in a completely different direction. Pull this around. That will help to give a sense of the form, the 3-dimensional shape of the face. Because your face is a sculpture, right? So it's like that has a form to it. It isn't a shape that's actually there in the photograph as such, but it's an interpretation of the tonal values that are there. So that's the artistic part of this exercise. Not the technical side so much, but more just the artistic part of it. And as artists and designers, this is such a useful skill to learn to be able to like take something which is complex and then simplify it down to something which is graphic and understandable at an instant. It's an essential skill. Whether you're doing graphic design, web design, car design, motion graphics, having that understanding of being able to interpret visual information and then convert it into something which has a simpler, more understandable form is a very, very useful skill. So I'm not going to go all the way around here. I'm going to cut off here because I want to save a little bit of time. this part I would actually have to, this part again, I'm getting confused there because I'm drawing the beard when really what I want to be drawing is the tonal value actually. So let me leave a little bit more of this on. So we'll go up here a little bit. I'm drawing this a little bit more roughly than I would normally do. But the other thing you can do when you're doing this type of exercise is start off quite loose. And then you could always go back afterwards and clean it up by readjusting the position of points. So this is one of those things where, again, it comes down to the way that you think. So it might be easier for you to think of it that way, or that process might work better for you. For somebody else, it might be better for them to really make sure that they get it right from the offset, because they know that they're never going to go back and readjust it. Knowing yourself. It's all about knowing yourself, really, when it comes down to it. Knowing what your limitations are and what your capabilities are. Never accept them. Never accept your limitations. Always push past them. Chris is good at that, aren't you, Chris? Pushing past your limitations. Being all coy now. So I'm going to go up here, and then I'm just going to go off of here for right now. So this is not quite the shape that I would draw. I would actually have it go all the way around here, and I'd have that all be one shape. But I can always add to it afterwards, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to go off here. And I want to complete the shape around the face. So it needs to go all the way around the outside. This is the same technique I'd use for the shading that we did in that last exercise with the leg, remember? So I'm going to do this color, and then I'm going to change the blending mode with this shape to multiply. Now in this particular case, that's not really going to be the color I'm going to ultimately end up with, but it'll give you a starting point. It'll give me an idea. And then with the shape builder tool, I would select both that shape and the face shape, and then option click with the shape builder tool on this outside area so that we have that edge. So the reason for doing the shape builder tool is it saves me having to try and draw along this edge accurately. I don't have to do that. I've now got this shape which sits on the top of my face. In this case, I'm using the blending mode, but actually probably what I would want to do is set this to normal, and then let's eyedropper that darker area then. And then I'd want to have a middle tone inside of that, right? So there would be then another lighter area, not as dark as that, that would come sort of like along here. So along underneath the eye, maybe. Around here, inside the glasses a little bit. Around here. When I get down to there, it would come sort of along here. And it would sort of follow that edge, you know? So you then that creates a sort of transition from the darker shade into the lighter shade. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there is a tendency for people, particularly with things like eyes or the mouth or the nose, is to sort of default to a symbol. So the whole idea of drawing on the right-hand side of the brain is that the left-hand side of the brain, at least in theory, as of the 1960s when this book was written. So this theory is a little bit out of date now, to be honest with you, because there's been some changes in the way that we understand the way that the brain works. But basically, you have two hemispheres. So the theory behind this is that the left-hand side of the hemisphere is primarily to do with language, math, learning languages like English and stuff like that, and also logical sort of things. Whereas the right-hand side of the brain is more to do with things like intuition, and then it's also to do with things like spatial relationships. And as it turns out, drawing is primarily a right-hand side of the brain type activity, which is why you might experience that when you're drawing, you tend to slip into a point where it's difficult to talk, because talking is language. You also lose track of time, because time is a logic left-hand side of the brain type activity. And so you can be drawing and all of a sudden it's dark because 2 hours have gone by. But the reason I mention that is that, so when you're drawing an eye, because we tend to be left-hand dominated, the left-hand side of the brain tends to dominate because of the way that we're educated with such an emphasis on reading and writing and math and so on, that when we come to doing an eye, we do something like this. Which is definitely an eye. Everybody can recognize that's an eye, because that's what a symbol is. It's something that everybody can recognize. But it's not my eye taken from that photographic image, because I'm ignoring the visual information that's there altogether. I'm just using the information that I know an eye contains. But what is really there is a change in tonal value, which is dark right here. And that darkness goes around to here. And then it comes back down here, up into here, and then around here. And then there's a slightly darker area there, which we'll leave till afterwards. But if you put that as the darker tone, although that still needs more detail in it, it's closer to my eye. It's a representation of the photographic image. So if I show you again the one that's the sort of more finished version. You can see, if you zoom in on it, it's a bunch of blobs. It's not a representation of an eye as a symbol. It's a representation of the shapes that I can see there. I'm obviously having to simplify them because they're only flat. There's no transitions of tone. So it is actually, in a sense, an abstraction of that. But it is still, it'll give you something which ultimately ends up being a more realistic representation of the world. So
aren't the eyes the most important detail?
Yeah, probably true. Yeah, the eyes in a portrait tends to give the personality of the person. Yeah, very much so. So this is the exercise sheet for this next week. So this is due next week, all right? And like I said, it doesn't necessarily need to be quite as complicated as the one that I'm doing. You can take this as far as you want to take it. So it might be an interesting exercise for you to really throw yourself into, because like I said, the idea of it is really for you to practice using the pen tool. Really get into it. So all of these details within this shirt are taken from the photographic image, you know, and they're an abstraction of it, but they're all done with the pen tool. Just copying with the pen tool. So you can see I've missed some bits there. I could maybe go in further and add more detail if I wanted to. You could continue adding more and more and more and more detail if you wanted to, but at a certain point, what's the point? You know, you end up with something that looks basically like the photograph, but it's now a vector. But the idea, I think, for me, is more like the idea that you're taking something which is a photograph, and then you're converting it into something new, which is more graphic, more strident, more bold. So it's how do I simplify it? And then I wanted to say on here, I've done some examples where I'm adjusting the color. So on this one, for instance, if you look at it, if I select, this one has got this color overlay. So this color overlay is a very intense magenta pink, which has been set to the blending mode color dodge at 24%. So if this was at 100%, it would look like this. Let me zoom out. So if this was at 100%, it would look like this. But I think there's something interesting about this idea with this exercise, because we start off, I'm tracing it, I'm doing fairly realistic colors. So those are not exactly eyedroppered from the photograph, but they're pretty realistic colors, close to what the actual photograph looks like. And then what I have found is that by adjusting the color, you can make a very dramatic shift in the mood, you know? So if you select all of this whole area, make sure nothing's locked. So right now, this one also has a color blend over the top of it, you can see. This one is set to 42% on color burn, just making it darker. If I put it to 100%, it would look like this. If you play around with these blending modes, you can see that all of them do different things. So this is darken, this is multiply, this is color burn. By the way, this background is below the illustration of me. So if I turn off all of the layers except for that top layer, no, actually it's not on that one. Where is that one? That's confusing. Hide this for a second. Yeah, so this one, there's another layer above that. Let's hide that. And then this is the actual illustration. So this is all grouped together. But all of the illustration is on there. And then there's the color thing above it. So if I make sure I've got all of that selected, I can then go up to this area at the top where it says recolor artwork. And if I click on that, in the preview, all of my selection points disappear, so it makes it easy for you to see. And you have these two options at the top. One of them is assign, so you could assign a different color to a particular area. These are all of the colors that are being used in that illustration along the top. If I go into edit, we have another view of it. So under edit, we have this color wheel. Down here, we have an HSB breakdown. H stands for hue, the actual color, red, green, yellow, blue, purple, whatever. Saturation is how little or how much gray a color has in it. So if I bring it this way, it's really gray. If I link them all, I can make them all desaturated. So they'll all be gray. If I bring it this way, they'll all be saturated. So they're really intense color, no gray in them whatsoever. If I bring it this way, it lightens everything. If I bring it this way, it darkens everything. The white doesn't darken at all because there's no color in it at all. It's 0, 0, 0, 0, so it stays as white. And if I go this way, you can see that the black doesn't change at all because it's 100% black, so it doesn't get any lighter. But you could adjust it separately. So the thing I like about this feature is that it allows you to go in and adjust either individual colors. So you could go in and take a particular color and adjust it by unlinking them. With an illustration that's this complicated, with so many different colors, it's kind of hard to find the color that you want to adjust sometimes. But you can adjust a particular color, or you can link them all together and adjust them all at once. And color has such a lot to do with emotion that by shifting the color of an illustration, you can really shift the emotional value of it as well. Okay, let me get out of here for a second and just go back to the handout for a second and see what else we need to cover. Okay, so I think we're all good. Let me just go into the modules section and see what time the first meeting is.
John, I have a question.
Yeah.
About the symbols project, do you want us to label like what the symbol is?
That's a good question. No, leave them without the labels because I want, when we're doing the critique, I want people to be able to know, I want to know whether people can recognize them.
Okay, thank you.
Give me 1 minute. Okay, so the first group is going to start now. Right now I have 7 people in that group. Is there anybody that's in that group that's not ready and wants to be in one of the later groups? So in that first group, let me share my screen for a second. I talked about this a little bit right at the beginning of the class, but I think some people came in after I'd started the class. So what I've set up, this is in Canvas under People. I've set up this group called Critique 1, or Critique Project 1, I should say. And then in here, there are 3 groups that I've set up. So I've split the class into 3 groups, and I've just randomly put people in there. So right now there is room in the second group. If anybody wants to be in the group from 1 to 2, you can move yourself. At least that's my understanding. This is the first time I've done this, used this group, but it looks like some people have already moved themselves. So you should be able to move yourself to a different group if you want. But these 2 groups, the first group and the second group, are already full, because I didn't want to have groups where there was like 13 in one group and then 1 in another. So I limited it to 7 people. But if you wanted to be in, say, the last group, which is now full, you could ask somebody else. So is there anybody in either of these groups that wants to move into group 2? Or you're all happy with where you are right now? Okay, so if you're not in the first group, because we're now going to start the critique part of the process. If you're not in this first group, this first group is going to have 7 people. So I've got Clifford, Denise, Nathan, Michelle, Shelley, Jocelyn, and Jonathan are going to be in the first group. Your project should now be on Canvas. Do you all have your projects on Canvas ready to present? Or if you want, you can share them on your screen if you haven't uploaded it. But I do need you to upload them as well if possible. All right, and then anybody that's in the other groups, you can take off now and you can work on your symbols a little bit more. And then you can come back. So if you're in group 2, you come back at 1 o'clock, obviously. And then if you're in group 3, you'll come back at 2:30. All right. So anybody that's not in this first group, I'll see you guys later. And then I'll start with Clifford.
So I don't have anything uploaded right now.
But do you have it on your screen, Clifford?
I don't.
Oh, okay. So do you want to be in a different group?
Yeah.
So do you want to move yourself into that second group? Because that second group has like 3 people in it.
Okay.
I didn't get a chance to do mine either because I was sick running the fever. So, but I would like to listen to.
Do you have your, which group are you in right now, May?
In second.
In the second group. So do whatever you can do by the time that your critique is. One thing I should stress is that it isn't imperative that you have everything finished for the critique. So we're going to do a critique of the project. Maybe you only have 16 symbols, or maybe you only have 15 symbols, or something like that. And maybe they're not all finished, but at least you have something that you can present. The idea of the critique is for you to get feedback on what you've done. You might even, if you haven't done anything yet, you can maybe even present your thumbnails. But I would like you to try to present something. So if you haven't got something right now, if you're in a later group, you can spend this time working on it and do whatever you can do. And then when we're doing the critique, you can also discuss the difficulties you're having, and I can help you individually. You know, I'll do demonstrations to show you how you go about doing some of them. All right?
I finished the drawing, 15 of them. I just have not got a chance to.
May, I'm going to start the first critique because we have a very limited amount of time, and we're already 9 minutes late starting that critique. So I'm going to start that, and then you're going to be in the next group. So do whatever you can do, and then come back when that critique is on, okay?
All right, thanks.
Okay, thanks, May. All right, so Clifford, you don't have anything to present right now. So let me see who's the next person in that group. So the next person, I've got Michelle. Let's do Michelle next. Are you seeing my screen right now?
No.
No? Okay. Okay, so this is Michelle's project. So when we're doing the critique, I'm going to have you present it. You can talk a little bit about it if you want to. You don't really have to say much when you're presenting the project, but if there's something you want to explain about it, so maybe you could, for instance, say like, you know, it's not quite finished, but you know, that third one on the left is really weird, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. Or you can say whatever you want really, but I want you to present the symbols. Maybe you had a specific concept also behind the way you approached it, so you could talk about that. And then I'm going to pick on whoever's in the group to critique the project, so that everybody gets an opportunity to critique. All right. And then when you're critiquing the project, I want you to think about primarily these things. Do all the symbols feel like they belong together as a set? So this includes things like, do they have the same visual weight? When you squint at them, is the one that stands out as being much stronger than another? And then, are they very readable? Do I understand what that symbol is supposed to represent pretty clearly? And then you can just also make other suggestions. Like maybe I feel like that if it was a little bit shorter, or perhaps that would work better if you simplified it, or maybe that would work. So those kinds of things. All right, that's the main focus. And then you can also think about the idea of negative and positive space, like the relationship of the negative and the positive space in terms of the design. Okay, so these are Michelle's. Do you have anything you want to say about them, Michelle?
What I did is I pretty much follow my sketches.
Mm-hmm.
The only one I change is the one on the bottom row, the second one from the right. So that's not something in my thumbnail.
The one that's like a
this one, yeah,
column, right?
And the funny one is I thought the music symbol one would be the easiest.
Uh-huh.
And I did that one first, and then it turned out totally weird. And
that one's very different from the other ones, isn't it?
Yeah, because first I thought it just like curves and use the pen tool, but actually it intertwines, and I wasn't sure how to address that. And then for the other symbols, I tried to break down on the geometric shapes. Try to simplify my thumbnails to have even less lines.
Yeah, okay. So Denise, can I have you do the critique for this one?
Yes. I think that they all fit really well together. They all have really like thin lines, and like they look very in unison. I do agree that the music though, it's like a little maybe too thick, but I know you see that too. Yeah, I think they work all really well together.
Except for the music note, right?
Except for the music one, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I really can't find really any fault in it. Maybe like the dollar sign and the money, maybe that one's a little too thick, or the lines in the apron, maybe those are too thick. But I that's just me trying to like pick something out.
Does anybody else have suggestions?
I did have issues when I was doing the apron, the lines. I guess after today's demo, I could do it. I can redo it. Yeah. But basically, I just use the pen tool and then make it really thick.
And you think it should be sort of thicks and thins, maybe?
I think you should just have the outline, not filled in.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize it's actually a shape. I thought it's just a very thick line that I couldn't change it.
Because that one does look different from most of the other ones. The light bulb also has like a black shape at the bottom, and then the chair on the very last one also has a black shape at the feet, whereas all the other ones are just strokes. I think that the way that you have them, like the top row, and actually most of them, they seem to fit very well because they have a consistent line weight. And then the one which is the music note, and then the other ones that have those sort of thicker black strokes sort of stand out as being sort of distinctly different because of the weight of them. Some of them are beautiful, by the way. I really like the one with the compact and the lipstick. I like very much, and I really like the flowers one. One thing I noticed is that on the first three, they all seem to have a sense of 3 dimensions. So the books, for instance, are 3-dimensional books. The lipstick particularly has like that little curve at the bottom, which makes it feel like it's a 3-dimensional cylindrical shape. The compact has like a depth to it, and then the flowers is sitting in a vase, which is three-dimensional. But then the teapot is suddenly flat. I kind of feel like the teapot should also fit with that three-dimensional quality. And you can maybe do that with some of the others as well. So for instance, with the school supplies. And then on the money, the coins could also be, you know, like if you started with a cylinder like the compact, and then you just duplicated them on top of each other.
Okay.
You them on top of each other, because they also look a little bit like they're floating to me because the bag is lower than the coins. So in terms of perspective, that doesn't really quite make sense because the coins presumably are sitting on the surface in front of the bag, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that one looks a bit weird. Also, the top of the sack to me feels a bit weird. I feel like it needs to be refined a little bit.
Okay.
I think that's probably it there. Yeah. Does anybody else have comments? Very good.
Thank you.
You get an awkward clap, Michelle. No extra charge. All right. Let's see who's in the next group. I should open another window to do this, otherwise I'm flipping backwards and forwards also. Okay, so I'm going to do Jonathan's next. Let me open a new window first. So, Jonathan, do you want to say anything about them before we have somebody critique it? I think you might be muted right now, Jonathan. Are you there? Jonathan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. I just went to the bathroom.
Okay, sorry. So we're doing the critique for your project. I have it on the screen right now. Give me a second. I'm going to share the screen, and then can you say anything about the project before we critique it? Do you have anything you want to say about it?
Yeah. There's a few things I had trouble with.
Okay.
One of them was the design for the cat. I actually had trouble thinking about what would represent a cat.
Uh-huh. Okay. And then, so you're not really happy with the one that you ended up with, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, good. And then, let me see. Michelle, I'll have you do the critique for this one, okay? I'm going to download this file because the orientation is the other way around. It's kind of long. It's hard to see it all together. So give me a second. I'm going to download it and then I'll open it in Illustrator. I have to, when I download these Illustrator files, it changes it to this .ps at the end of it, so I have to get rid of that. All right, so let me zoom out a little bit. I'm going to rearrange these a little bit so that we can see them easier, okay?
All right.
So remember that this is supposed to be 11 by 17 inches. So if I make it 17 wide by 11 high, and then I'm going to arrange them in that grid. So I'm just going to do this fairly roughly like this. Command 5. And then I'm going to turn the grid off. And then we're going to put each one of these into a square. So I'm not doing these in any particular order. When you turn it in, you might want to think about the order that they're in, but for right now, I'm just positioning them. Okay. This is one, right?
Yes.
And then this is another one?
Yeah.
And then this is another one. This one had an image on there that's missing, but the image is in color anyway, and you can't have color on here.
Oh, okay.
Is this one right here?
Yeah, that's one.
Okay, and then this is the next one. This is two, is it?
No.
That's one thing.
Yeah.
And then this is another one. And then are we missing one?
You have two on one.
This one is two.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think I said Michelle, right, for this one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think overall they are readable. However, I think that the cat one, the line weight is a lot thinner compared to other ones.
Yeah.
I think maybe the console game one is also kind of thin.
Yeah. It's also kind of small as well. So let's make that bigger and see.
Right. I think yeah, the scale wise, I think that they can be rescaled a little bit.
Yeah. They all need to be scaled. But it would work better if it was like the same line weight as. They really all should be the same line weight, Jonathan.
Okay.
So set that you can just eyedropper them, like on the cat, eyedropper them. Now you might decide to use more than one line weight. So on here it's got a no fill, so I'm going to change that so it's got a fill, so it covers up that stuff that's behind. Were these supposed to be there? No, huh? Or
No.
No. On the cat, one thing I would suggest. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michelle. I'll do that after.
Okay. I think this is not really a critique. It was kind of my concern when I designed the icons. Is something like the one he has with trees, and I think it's down below.
Yeah, I know.
So that's like it's talking about something really big, and then when you're talking about a game console, that's small. In real life, that we are having different scales.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I see what you mean, yeah.
It become like when I read it, I'm not sure if. I think that was my concern when I designed mine. So I tried to have them relatively not have something really grand and something really tiny.
Yeah. The thing is with the symbols is that the size of the symbol is the way that it's ultimately going to get used. So I didn't define in this project how these symbols would be used. But let's say they were used on an interface of some kind, like a user interface. Then they're all going to be used at the same scale. They're all going to be the same size. So it's representing a thing or an idea, right? I don't think you want to worry about, like, should this thing be smaller than this thing? They're all going to be the same size, but they need to be clear enough to represent the thing that it is itself without having to worry about the scale, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think when you're trying to depict a larger scenery, the line weight become more complicated. I think I'm processing more information than compared to like a music note that's a very simple.
Do you mean because it's just a more complicated image?
Right. I think it gives me a lot more information, like the trees. Yeah. They are a lot. Like maybe I can say.
Like maybe there should be less of them.
Couple trees with part of the sun or moon. I'm not sure. And like the table with a person sitting. Perhaps it could be simplify with smaller, just like crop it somehow, so it doesn't look there's a lot of information, I think.
Because you feel like relative to this one that there's too much information.
Right, and then the one next to the music, no, the one to, I think it's a canvas. No.
Oh, this one here, yeah.
Yeah, like maybe it could be even simplified. Like perhaps I don't need the stand, the bottom part.
I don't think we need all this actually. I think you could have probably one.
Right. So.
If anything.
Right, and then if I just zoom in the top, and I think it's very clear it's a canvas.
Yeah.
So I think some of it could be simplified to give more focal point.
Yeah. I think that's true. That's something that that's one thing that you need to look at anyway, Jonathan, is the relative complexity of them. So I think that one thing you always want to do with this kind of thing is to see how you can simplify everything. You know, that's part of the sort of thing. I would take off the word movie here. That should be recognizable as a video. Now, it's funny to use a video, obviously, because it's an outdated technology. Did you think about that at all?
Yes, I did.
But you still think it's everybody knows what it means anyway, right?
Well, maybe not the newer generations, but the older ones.
But I suppose it's still like understandable for most people. Yeah. Or do you think there's somebody who's like a kid now that wouldn't even have a clue what that was?
I think it would be understandable now.
Yeah, for most people, it would probably be understandable, I think. But it is hard. One of the things that's difficult with symbols is trying to make symbols with something which isn't like with movies, for instance. Movies aren't really a thing. You know, they're an idea more than anything. So there is a physical format in which they're distributed these days. It's streaming, but traditionally it was film. So you could represent it by the physical thing, but that changes over time. And with streaming, how do you represent the physical nature of that? You can't. So I don't know. I'm not saying you shouldn't do the video cassette tape. I'm just saying that it's something to think about. Is like how people understand that. So I think overall, Jonathan, you've done a really good job. But what you want to do now is just try to refine them a little bit. So make sure that they all carry the same line weight. Lay them out like I'd asked you. So you got 5 across and 3 down. And make sure that they all occupy the same visual weight. So they have a similar level of complexity, a similar level of black versus white. So that when you look at them as a group, they feel like they belong together. So as Michelle was pointing out, the musical note particularly is very, very simple. And then the other thing I would think about is like here you're doing something which represents dimension. So you've got a 3-dimensional piece of paper because we're viewing it at an angle. So it's a very simple representation of 3 dimensions, but it still has a certain dimension to it. This one also. This one doesn't. So this one's kind of flat. This one's flat. This one's flat. This one's flat. This one's flat. And so I think that I might either go so that they're all flat or make them all have a little bit of dimension. Okay?
All right.
Otherwise, they look really good. It's a very good start. All right. Awkward hand clap for you, Jonathan. Okay, let me see. Next. So Denise, do you want to present yours next?
Yes.
So this is the symbols, and then this is the sketches, is it? Oh, it's just another. It's just a JPEG.
Oh yeah, I was. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so obviously, I did mine in color.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I misunderstood.
That's all right.
But I think that I can go back and balance out like my black and white and.
So this is actually, I think it's kind of an interesting challenge for you now. So you're going to take these ones where you're defining different areas of these symbols by color. And now you got to figure out, how do I define that just with black and white?
Yeah, I had initially just done them black and white, and then I was like, oh, let me do them in colors. I couldn't just.
Did you save the black and white version?
Yeah, I still have it. I changed some
Yeah.
characters, but I don't think it'd be that hard to figure out.
What was your approach to drawing them? Because they have a particular, they have a very strong, unique style to them, and that is often to do with the process. So I'm assuming that the process you're using is primarily the blob tool. Is that right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think I think that's what it's called. It looks like a paintbrush.
Yeah. So it's this tool in Illustrator where it's hidden with the paintbrush tool, and it's called the blob brush tool.
Oh, I actually just used the paintbrush then.
Oh, did you?
The one above it, yeah.
You use this one?
Yeah.
This would be a better tool for you to use for it, though, actually. So let me explain. Let me explain to you why. So when you use the paintbrush, you're creating a path, right, like that. So when you're drawing your symbols and you're coloring in, presumably, areas like that, right?
Yeah.
That becomes very complicated very quickly. But if you're using the blob brush, when I draw something here to fill it in, it's joining up with that shape. Oh, not on the blob brush. So it joins in with that shape. So this becomes one big shape throughout there.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the style of yours a lot. Let me choose somebody to critique it. Hang on. Jocelyn, can I have you do the critique for these?
Yeah.
Hang on, sorry, let me get back to it. There you go. So obviously they need to be in black and white. But what else do you have any suggestions for any of them? Do you think that they're
actually really like the style of it?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something she could do is like use the main outline features of it, and then some of the darker ones she could take them into like black, so use like the negative space of it to give it the feature in black and white.
I really like them. I think that they're really good. It's just how you translate that now into black and white. But I do really like them. I think they're really good. They've got a really nice friendliness about them. You know, because I think that it's very easy with these symbols to end up with something which feels very generic and kind of mechanical. And that can work on a functional level very well. But I think that also with these symbols, we want to think about how it expresses emotion and stuff. This is something which has been sort of come to the fore more over the last sort of 20 or 30 years in design, particularly, is this idea of design having personality. So if you think of like the Bauhaus in the early part of the 20th century, and their philosophy of design is very kind of strict, it's very modernist, and it's kind of purist, and everything, it's a bit serious in a way. It's like everything has to be super functional and clean and precise. And then with postmodernism, designers sort of start playing around with the fact that objects that we buy have a kind of personality to them, you know. And so like the front of a Mini Cooper, for instance, looks kind of like a face, and it has a sort of friendliness to it, which the product itself, it affects the way people relate to the product, you know. And so with the symbols, it's the same thing. If you're creating a user interface, obviously it needs to be functional, and people need to be able to find what they need as quickly as possible. Or wayfinding, you know, like wayfinding is another example of where symbols are used a lot. Wayfinding graphics will be things like signage around a campus in a university or a hospital or something like that, where it's got signs and it'll have symbols for different things like exits and stuff. So wayfinding graphics is another example where it doesn't really need to be institutional. It could have a sense of personality to it, I think. And that's something which has started to creep into graphics more, you know, at different periods in history. It sort of comes and goes, to be honest with you, but it's something to really think about. And I like the way that you've imbued these with a kind of humorous quality to them and a kind of friendliness about them. All right, very good. Jocelyn, do you want to present yours next?
Sure.
Okay.
So I turned in 2 versions. Oh, I don't know why it looks like that.
It might be, let me download it. It might be because it's saved as a PDF, and so you had layers turned off or turned on, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And then the layers show up on the PDF. But if I open it in Illustrator, it should be okay. Try that.
I turned in 2 versions, one with the black square and the other one without it. So it's like black outlines.
Okay, let me.
Because I wasn't sure which ones to end up with.
Okay, so that's that, and then the other one is a reverse of that, is it?
Yeah.
Let me download that one. So this one's project 1. Yeah, that's 1 and 1. Okay, so this is it. Okay, all right, cool. Which one do you prefer, or you don't know?
I prefer this one.
Okay. So there's this one, and then there is also this one. And then let me see. Shelley, can I have you do the critique for this one?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things that stands out to me is some things are like really heavy, like in the Pokemon ball or in the music. No, or in the One Direction, like the arrow and the Lego block, the like black, the middle block. I think those are kind of heavy. I think everything else, like the weight of the lines, match really well. But I think that's just the main thing that stands out to me.
So you think like some of them have that and some of them don't? If they all had it, you think it'd be like if they all had like a big solid area of black. I know, like on the Christmas tree, you've got the star is black. Because the way I see it is, it just creates some inconsistency. Like with the Pokemon ball, it's like there's a lot of black on that one. That one could actually probably be a little bit smaller anyway, but it still has a lot of black. Whereas the Christmas tree has a tiny bit of black. Like maybe that it should be more like the Christmas tree has a couple of decorations on there that are black, and then the trunk is black as well. So there's more black over there. And then maybe with the I'm trying to think of another one. Like with the mixer, for instance, perhaps the body of the mixer is black, and the mixing bowl where you see the mixer itself is in just a stroke. I would do it one of these two things. Either make them consistently so they have almost the same amount of black on all of them, or get rid of those solid areas of black and just stick to having like the outline, the stroke for it. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
I actually quite like, I felt like the consistency on these ones to me seems better. I feel like when I look at them like this, I don't know why, but the big solid areas of white don't stand out quite as much to me on this one. Although it is actually the same relationship, I think, isn't it? All right. Does anybody else have comments? Okay, very good. Those are really good. Let's see what else we've got. So we still need to do yours, Shelley, and then we still need to do.
Yeah.
Let's do Shelley's next then. Are these Are these the sketches?
Yeah, those are the sketches.
Okay, all right. So we'll look at this one.
Yeah, I also didn't know we were supposed to do it in black and white, so I'll just change.
Okay.
I'll just change it after.
Actually, I would accept this because the idea was really that you're not using the color or the gray scale or something as like a part of the idea or to separate stuff. Here, these basically are black and white. They're just, you know, that you put them into a color. So you still have just one solid and then white, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you could change them to black and white. But I don't mind them like this. It was really the idea of it. Like if you were to print it, it would be one color, and it wouldn't separate, and it wouldn't. There wouldn't be like tonal values. There wouldn't be like a lighter version of it or a darker version. It would all be just one color. That was the idea.
Yeah.
So you can focus on just the negative and positive space, which you can. Okay. Who else still needs to do a critique? Let me see. Nathan, can you do the critique for this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I am not good at this.
It's okay. Take your time. So one of the things, I'll ask you questions and then you tell me what you think. And remember that this is just your opinion. You know, it's not whether something's necessarily right or wrong. You're expressing your opinion. So it's really just a matter of looking at the stuff and then thinking about, you know, does it work for you? So these are the things I want you to think about. First of all, do you feel like in terms of all of the symbols together that they feel like they're consistent?
Yeah, I think they are consistent, and I can tell what all of these symbols stand for.
Yeah, so they're easy to read, right?
Yeah.
And they have a good sense of consistency. Yeah, I like these a lot. I think that they're very good. They have a really strong sense of consistency. When I look at all of them, they all feel like they have a similar visual weight. They have a similar style, similar level of complexity. The only one that I find is a little bit more complex than the other one is the ball of string.
Yeah.
So did you think about that one?
Yeah. That's actually like I just used outlines for this, like no fill. So I kept the stroke the same on like everything.
Right.
But I think it's just the overlapping makes it look really heavy, and I wasn't sure how to.
Yeah, because there's so many
fix
lines.
That with.
I
thought I needed it.
That one is tricky, and I think you do need it for it to be understandable. I just think that what you might have to do is perhaps try taking some of it off, so there's less. Because like you have on all of the other ones, they have a very similar level of detail and complexity. Yeah. The only one that gets really complicated is that one, and it is that sort of overlapping and the meshing of the wall. Maybe instead of using like 4 lines, you use 3 lines, and maybe instead of having 3 sets of them overlapping, you just have 2 sets or something like that. But I think it's a bit simpler.
Okay.
The other, and this is being a bit picky, okay, but you see on the bike, I think that the angle of the down bar from the saddle down to where the pedals are should be a little bit more vertical. It feels like it's too much of an angle leading back.
Okay.
And the other one I have is on the lipstick. I think that should be the same line weight as the other object.
Yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, it looks great. I really like it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Very good. All right, who else do I need to present in this group? I think Nathan's next, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to say about them, Nathan?
I think I put too much detail on the TV, the arcade machine, and it's, I don't know what to say. It's just.
You feel like they're too complicated?
Yeah.
Or some of them are, yeah.
And I probably shouldn't have put color on the Christmas ornaments.
Oh yeah, made it gray. Yeah, it should just be black and white, yeah. So who hasn't done a critique yet? That's part of this group for the critique.
I don't think I did one.
Who's that, Jonathan?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Can you do the critique for this one then?
Sure. I think there's where the bookshelf is at. I think there's a little bit too much maybe books. Maybe you can like
you could simplify it by having less books. Is that what you said?
Yeah, maybe you can simplify it.
And yeah, it's hard to read that one because it's so complicated. At a small size, it's difficult to tell it's books. I think it would read more clearly if they were bigger and smaller. Sorry, if they were bigger and less of them.
Yes. And is that a television set or a computer?
The one in the middle is a computer, and the one on the top left, well, next to the top left one is a TV.
Oh, okay. For the computer, maybe you can make something that could distinguish it more, because to me, it looks like it doesn't look like a computer. So maybe you can add some more features to it, like a keyboard, to make it look like a computer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It could also be like where you have windows open on the computer, like maybe you just have a couple of rectangles that overlap each other, and they sort of represent the idea of windows being open on a computer screen. I think also the proportion of it feels a bit too square for a computer screen. The proportions are wrong. And then
I was trying to make one of like a really old...
one thing I'd say, Nathan, is that the illustration that you did of the television and the video game thing are really lovely illustrations, like all with all the detail in them. So keep them as just illustrations, but then try to make them more into symbols. So simplify them, okay? They're really beautiful, though. I really like them a lot. They're very nice. Okay. Does anybody else have suggestions? All right, very good. Have I gone through everybody in the group now? Has everybody presented? I think so, huh? Yeah. Okay. So are you all clear on what you need to do for next week? You guys, for next week, you've got to finish up these symbols projects. So remember, I don't grade them at this point. This is just to give you feedback on them. And then you need to turn them in for next week with the changes. If you want more feedback, you're always welcome to set up individual meetings to meet with me between classes. So if you want extra help or you're trying to work on the assignment and you're not really quite getting it, you can always like message me on Canvas, and then we can set up on a one-on-one meeting, okay? And then the other thing you're going to do is the tracing assignment, okay? So the tracing assignment, you're going to take a photograph of yourself, some kind of selfie or a portrait, something that looks like you, okay? Because part of it is I don't really get to see most of you because you've got like your cameras off and I don't really know who you are. So part of it is a sneaky way of me getting to see what you look like. So I want you to take that picture, and then you can use this as your profile picture on Zoom. So when you're not showing your video, I can actually see your face. But you're going to trace it using the pen tool, separate it into layers like I'd shown you. So remember, you create a template layer, and there'll be a recording of the demonstration. There is also a recording already there of how to do the tracing exercise. It's pretty much the same as the demonstration I did in the class, okay? Does anybody have questions before you take off?
Can the illustration be of an old photo?
Can it be of what, sorry?
An old photo.
An old photo, yeah. Does it look like you?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah. They're actually all old photos, aren't they? Pretty much every photo you take is you in the past. I haven't got any photos of me at this very moment, or of any in the future. All right. You guys can take off, and then I'm going to start my next critique. If you guys want to come to the next critique, so I'm going to end this meeting. But if you want to come to the next critique just to sit in, if it interests you to see what other people are doing, you're welcome to do that. But you don't need to be in any of the other meetings, okay? All right, see you guys.
Thank you.
See you guys next week. Bye.